Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show. Well, Clark said, wishing he could cry. Even the Archbishop had already defended the Tower of Dusk. What else could he do? After all, the Brilliant Shrine was the real owner of the Leaden Kingdom. However, at this moment, a brazen laughter came as a middle-aged general who was in his 40s arrived together with two nobles who were chubby like meatballs. Archbishop Domingo, Sir Halyard, I didn't expect to see the two of you here at Clark's. It's my absolute honor, said the middle-aged general, who bowed to Domingo and Halyard after entering the guest hall. However, his gaze was full of respect, and not fear. Upon sight of them, Domingo and Halyard had no choice but to frown slightly. The middle-aged general was Marshal Benjamin of the Leaden Kingdom, and the two chubby men behind him were the ministers of commerce and tax. However, although Benjamin was also a believer of the holy light, he was never close to the Brilliant Shrine, and even felt a sense of superiority. Hence, Domingo and Halyard didn't have a good impression of him. Besides, they had also heard that Benjamin was the backer who supported Clark during the dispute between Clark and Andre just now. Although Marshal Benjamin was saluting Domingo and Halyard calmly, he was also very surprised to see the two of them there. Upon sight of the two mages beside Domingo, Benjamin could guess that they were probably the mages of the Tower of Dusk. He didn't need any introduction at all. It was clear what the two big shots of the Tower of Dusk were there for. Benjamin secretly lamented. Although he could tell from the fact that the Tower of Dusk could afford magical crystals that the Felon Kingdom should be very powerful too, the Supreme Council wouldn't be able to affect the Leaden Kingdom, after all. However, he didn't expect the Tower of Dusk to be able to get the two big shots of the Brilliant Shrine to come forth. Marshal Benjamin, let me do the introductions. This is President Felix, the president of the Tower of Dusk. Domingo did not directly ask Benjamin to release the caravan of the Tower of Dusk, and instead introduced him to Lin Li. After hearing Domingo's introduction, Benjamin and the other wealthy and powerful figures of the Leaden Kingdom who were present were immediately filled with shock that they could not suppress. They knew that Domingo and Halyard were there to help the Tower of Dusk, but they felt that it was just the Tower of Dusk's good luck. However, they didn't expect them to address the young president of the Tower of Dusk as master. That was an honorary term, and those who could be addressed as masters were definitely few and far between in Amril. That showed that Lin Li's status was the same as theirs. After being introduced by Domingo, Lin Li humbly greeted the several nobles of Leaden Kingdom. He also expressed his gratitude to Andre for his help. Originally, Andre hadn't thought highly of the Tower of Dusk, but after hearing Lin Li thank him, he felt rather flattered. However, Clark's face grew increasingly sullen, and he kept his eyes fixed on Marshal Benjamin. He would have never expected that an unknown force in the Felon Kingdom would be so closely related to the higher-ups of the Brilliant Shrine. Although he was the one who'd caused everything, he didn't wish to see things getting blown out of proportion. What kind of person is this? What kind of a force is the Tower of Dusk? Benjamin had long discovered that Clark seemed to be wavering, but that was beyond his control. He had no choice but to secretly sigh in his heart. Although he was the Marshal of the Leaden Kingdom, in this holy nation, Domingo and Halyard were powerful figures of authority he could not shake. However, a shriek filled with excitement and respect came from outside at this moment. Yet, the shouting did not end. And it seemed that the entire Sparta was filled with those sounds. Finally, a clear yet agitated voice yelled, "His Holiness is here! His Holiness!" Except for Lin Li and the rest, the several nobles in the room looked at each other in astonishment when they heard that sentence, trying to verify if they had heard correctly. Although the city of Sparta was not too far from the city of Dawn, it had been decades since the Pope left the Holy Mountain. Even though no one dared to talk about it, many had already begun to speculate if Pope Rosario was still alive. Clearly, all the rumors were being revealed on their own now. No one in the Leaden Kingdom would dare to impersonate the Pope. However, there was another question in everyone's mind. Why did he come here at this time? There was a terrifying answer in their heads, but they dared not believe it at all. After all, the difference in status was too great. However, no matter what they thought, they still rushed out to greet the Pope quickly with respectful expressions. When the crowd arrived outside, they indeed happened to see the two archbishops in Los and Martin escorting the Pope through the corridor slowly. "All hail your holiness." When Pope Rosario approached, no one dared to show a tinge of negligence, and everyone instead showed as much respect as they could. "Okay, may the holy light always be with you. Rise." Rosario nodded slightly with a faint smile on his face. He seemed to have bathed them in holy light, causing the nervousness in their hearts to disappear without a trace. Immediately afterwards, Archbishop Los, who was standing next to Rosario, took 2 steps forward and said to the crowd, "All future operations of the Tower of Dusk in the Leaden Kingdom will be protected by the Brilliant Shrine. No one is to make things difficult for them deliberately with any excuses. This is a specially issued order." As soon as Los said those words, everyone was visibly shocked, as they had never thought that the Pope would issue such an order. That meant that the Tower of Dusk would have unlimited business rights in the Leaden Kingdom, and would never be restricted again. It was an unprecedented rule. "Master Felix, after you're done handling the matters here, please stay on the Holy Mountain for a few days. We still have many questions for you to answer," Los said to Lin Li with a smile before turning around and walking towards Pope Rosario. Pope Rosario did not stay there any longer. After getting Los to issue the decree, he left again while the crowd surrounded him. He didn't give Lin Li any special instructions either. However, everyone broke out in a cold sweat after Pope Rosario left, be it Marshal Benjamin, Count André, or the rest. In particular, General Clark was overwhelmed with regret, for he hadn't expected to see Pope Rosario, who hadn't left the Holy Mountain in decades, coming forth to defend a foreign force. The battle between the old and new forces of the Leaden Kingdom ended with a tie because of the Brilliant Shrine's intervention. The real winner was actually the Tower of Dusk, whom they had not taken seriously at first. The unrestricted business rights granted by the Pope himself was something unprecedented in Amril. However, it was an embarrassing matter for both the aristocratic group represented by Count André and the rising nobles represented by Marshal Benjamin. After all, the Tower of Dusk, which seemed like a pushover at first, finally became an existence that neither side could afford to offend. Hence, only the higher-ups of both parties knew the truth of this matter. The ones of the lower levels simply thought that they had obtained victory. Of course, the most important thing was that the people of both forces had been notified by their superiors to never make things hard for the Tower of Dusk's caravans in the future. After leaving General Clark's mansion, Benjamin rushed directly to the palace and reported about the matter in detail to King Sinelli. Although he grew up in the Leaden Kingdom and believed in the doctrine of the Holy Light, King Sinelli was the only person worthy of allegiance in Benjamin's heart. "You mean, the Brilliant Shrine has intervened and issued that warrant?" King Sinelli exclaimed as he remained seated quietly and listened to Benjamin, whom he trusted most. However, he would occasionally see some anger and indignation in his eyes. In the battle between the traditional nobles and the rising ones, many thought that Marshal Benjamin was the leader of the new nobles, and even General Clark thought that Marshal Benjamin was his biggest backer. However, no one would have imagined that their king, Sinelli, was the one who developed those forces. Without the intervention of the Brilliant Shrine, the event would eventually have a great impact on the traditional nobles, who might have even gotten wiped out under the control of King Sinelli. The traditional nobles would have to give up their place to the emerging forces that were valued greatly by King Sinelli. However, all of that was destroyed by the Tower of Dusk's attack. How could King Sinelli take it lying down? As a king, no one except an unambitious wastrel would be willing to feel suppressed all the time. This time, they even ignored him, and issued an exaggerated permit that was in favor of the Tower of Dusk. Unrestricted business rights? That's just the trampling of the laws of the kingdom. If this country is ruined, the Brilliant Shrine is not going to clean up the mess, right? He thought. Your Majesty, please simmer down. The Pope has not appeared for decades, so there had been various rumors, but I saw with my own eyes that the Pope is still alive and kicking. He's still the way he used to be, Benjamin said with a wry smile. Who would have thought that the Pope, who had not appeared in decades, would still be a godlike sanctuary realm powerhouse? This time, the influence of the brilliant shrine had been greatly stabilized, and no rumors would be able to break through their defense. Okay, got it. You may go down first. Although we can't touch the Tower of Dusk, those rotten nobles related to them should be wiped out according to the plan. Find out some information about the Tower of Dusk. I shall see who Mage Felix is and why he's regarded so highly by the brilliant shrine, King Sinelli said calmly, not revealing his resentment at all. After Benjamin left, King Sinelli sat in his chair, and frowned deep in thought instead of smashing things in exasperation. Although he was the king of the most powerful kingdom in Amril, Sinelli didn't feel the thrill of being the king at all. In fact, he felt that they were just pigs of the brilliant shrine, regardless of whether the kingdom was ruled by himself, his father, or his grandfather. Sinelli dared not lose his temper even at this time, because the guards and servants around him were all believers of the holy light, and were snitches of the brilliant shrine. Ever since he'd come of age, he had never been willing to live such a life. He refused to pray and worship another person. Hence, ever since he'd been crowned as the king, he had been continuously trying to strengthen himself in all aspects, and had not slacked at all. By the age of 30, he became a true legendary swordsman. That was precisely the reason that Sinelli managed to make the brilliant shrine ignore the first marshal who was in charge of the entire Leaden Kingdom army. In the opinion of others, the brilliant shrine's suppression was the reason Sinelli did not have to worry about Benjamin overthrowing him. However, even the brilliant shrine probably didn't know that Sinelli trusted Benjamin so greatly because of other reasons. Although they had been at odds with the Felon Kingdom for nearly a millennium, King Sinelli actually envied the royal family of the Felon Kingdom. The power of the Supreme Council there was not inferior to that of the brilliant shrine. Yet, the royal family of Felon Kingdom had actually managed to escape the control of the Supreme Council and truly become an independent kingdom. In contrast, the Queldala family of the Leaden Kingdom had been controlled by the brilliant shrine for all that time, and they almost had no freedom of choice. Even the queen had to request for the brilliant shrine's consent before going ahead with her decisions. If it weren't for his hostile relationship with the Felon Kingdom, Sinelli would have even gone to Felon Kingdom to learn from the royals of Felon Kingdom. The fallen nobles had all gotten used to being reared like pigs by the brilliant shrine. If anyone wanted to free them, the latter might just retaliate against them. Hence, Sinelli planned for a large number of nobles who were close to the brilliant shrine to be wiped out during this incident. He wasn't worried about attracting the attention of the brilliant shrine. Ever since Pope Rosario stopped appearing for a long time, the lofty clergymen also stopped caring about them. However, Sinelli did not expect the Tower of Dusk, which had been remaining silent, to attract the attention of the brilliant shrine and Pope Rosario, who had not appeared for decades. He had no idea if he should be angry or thankful. After all, Pope Rosario's appearance proved that what he had done before was not enough. Regardless of Rosario's influence, his sanctuary-level power alone was something that Sinelli's huge army couldn't defeat even if he had millions of soldiers. That was perhaps a good thing. If he hadn't been sure if Pope Rosario was still alive, and had continued acting the same way, he would probably have been dethroned. Ever since Marshal Benjamin left, Sinelli remained seated for a long time as he knocked his finger against the table gently, thinking about what he should do next. After solving the matter about the caravan, Gavin brought the caravan back onto the road, and returned to the Tower of Dusk in the breezy plains again. However, Lin Li did not go to the Darkness Shrine immediately. Instead, he returned to the Holy Mountain again, and headed back to the Church of Dawn. He owed the brilliant shrine a favor. Giving Rosario an antidote was just for fulfilling the previous agreement. In act, Lin Li had not expected that the matter about the caravan would get Rosario to appear in person and allow the Tower of Dusk to have unrestricted business rights. Of course, the favor needed not be returned immediately. Lin Li didn't return to the Dawn Cathedral entirely for the sake of returning the favor. It was mainly because Rosario promised to allow him to freely read the classics collected by the brilliant shrine instead. Previously on the Holy Mountain, Rosario had allowed Lin Li to read the Light Bible as a form of reward for giving him the antidote. In addition, he'd also wanted to use the Light Bible to verify if Lin Li was the son of the Holy Light which the Brilliant Shrine had been looking for. However, it was obvious that as long as Lin Li did not take out his debris of the stars, Holy Light, he wouldn't let the cat out of the bag. Combining his own prophecy and the information that Anglos and Martin had gotten back then, Rosario would never let Lin Li go just like that. He knew that Lin Li was going to the Darkness Shrine, but if Lin Li was really the son of the Holy Light, he would be sending himself to the Lion's Den by going to the Darkness Shrine. Hence, in order to make Lin Li stay, Rosario not only agreed to let Lin Li read the classics freely, he also promised to give Lin Li some pointers about theurgy, which was the use of the power of the Holy Light. Sendros hadn't mentioned what the matter was about or how urgent it was. Hence, Lin Li decided to stay at the Brilliant Shrine for a few more days, and return to the Holy Mountain with Domingo and Halyard even though he had originally planned to leave. Of course, Lin Li's return also made the old fogies who were passionate about pharmaceutics extremely elated. 2 days later, Marshal Benjamin personally sent the information regarding the Tower of Dusk to King Sinelli. Is everything mentioned here true? Sinelli looked at the information, which caused him to be in disbelief. He knew that only a powerful force would have the ability to purchase 15 magical crystal cannons all at once, be it in the Leaden Kingdom or the Felon Kingdom. However, he hadn't expected it to be the Tower of Dusk, which he had never heard of. To his surprise, it had only been a little more than 2 years since the Tower of Dusk had been established. It was built from scratch, and within just 2 years, it managed to become the top force in the Breezy Plains, and in fact, the entire Felon Kingdom. That was simply unfathomable, even myths were not that exaggerated. The information was about the description of the strength of the Tower of Dusk, the dozens of archmages above level 15, the hundreds of magic shooters above level 10, and their commercial network all over the world. King Sinelli could even say with certainty that the Tower of Dusk would definitely be the greatest force, besides the Brilliant Shrine, even if it were in the Leaden Kingdom. From the destruction of the Sire Bandits to the destruction of the powerful Dark Blade, the Tower of Dusk had killed plenty to achieve its current status. Everything was because of the extremely young president, who was a mage in his early 20s. Having obtained the inheritance of Juresco, the god of mages, and gone to the restricted area of the Haiga mountain range, Lin Li proceeded to explore the 7th sky castle of the High Elves. He then disappeared for half a year, and returned again as a level 23 legendary mage. He even defeated the 2 legendary leaders of the Dark Blade. It was said that he had also gained a lot from the participation in the operation of the Supreme Council, the exploration of Osric's mausoleum. Compared to the rapid rise of the Tower of Dusk, the growth and progress of Lin Li was even more exaggerated than legends, making Sinelli feel like he was reading a myth. Your Majesty, this information about the Tower of Dusk is actually no secret in the Breezy Plains, where everyone knows about this. This mage Felix is not easy to deal with. Benjamin shook his head and sighed. When he'd first got the information, he thought that the person who obtained the information made a mistake, and that the Tower of Dusk might have been established for 200 or 2,000 years, and not just 2 years. However, after comparing the information obtained via various channels, he found out that it had really been established for more than 2 years. Deal with him? Why? Sinelli looked at the information in his hand, and his shock gradually subsided. His grimace was replaced by a smile, and he said, "This mage Felix is indeed a rare talent. However, I can tell from this information that he's not someone who can be easily recruited. Even the Supreme Council had chosen to cooperate with him during the exploration of Osric's mausoleum. He's someone who refuses to submit to others," said King Sinelli, who felt rather envious and jealous. "Your Majesty, please speak with caution," Benjamin said hurriedly, to remind him. Now that Pope Rosario, who had not appeared for decades, finally appeared in front of the world again, the believers had become much more loyal. God knew if anyone in the palace would tell on him. Haha, okay, let's not talk about this. Let's talk about Felix. It's impossible to recruit him, but cooperating with him is a good choice. Sinelli looked away and glanced at Benjamin. Cooperation? Your Majesty, you're a king and a leader of the nation, he Benjamin frowned slightly. Leader of the nation? The real leader of the nation over there, Sinelli said as he pointed toward the holy mountain. He helplessly continued, I'm afraid the Pope probably appeared this time, because he was impressed with Mage Felix's abilities. We're already lagging behind, and yet we pushed him further away, because of that matter. This is all my fault for failing to check on him clearly, Benjamin said with a look of guilt. It's not your fault. That Mage Felix has really exceeded our expectations. If it weren't for what the brilliant shrine had done to defend them, I'm afraid I wouldn't have believed the information here, Sinelli said emotionally. He felt that the glory of the Queldela family should not be drowned in history. Although his journey was destined to be extremely difficult, he would still have to go on. Just a few days after Lin Li returned to the Dawn Cathedral, Harquis, the foreign affairs minister of the Leaden Kingdom, sent him an invitation that was similar to a diplomatic summons. Although Lin Li was a little surprised, he felt that it was normal after giving it some thought. Although diplomatic summons were generally used for foreign envoys, it was not exactly excessive given the Tower of Dusk's current position in the Leaden Kingdom. The big shots of the brilliant shrine who had asked Lin Li about pharmaceutics were rather displeased with the Leaden Kingdom's actions, but they didn't say anything, because the Tower of Dusk's interests were concerned. Lin Li arrived again in Sparta, this time in a luxurious carriage of the Leaden Kingdom. When he went there a few days ago, he was busy discussing pharmaceutical problems with Domingo and Halyard. This time, he finally had the chance to observe the landscape of Sparta City. He had no idea if it was because of the doctrine of holy light, but the buildings in Sparta were all still clean and bright even though they were not all white. Of course, the most obvious and outstanding one was still the Dawn Cathedral of the Brilliant Shrine. From time to time, the luxurious carriage would move past the White Chapel. Others who didn't know would simply think that they were going in circles, but when he returned previously, Lin Li heard from Domingo that there were more than 100 churches of various sizes in Sparta. The largest one was located next to the square in the city center, and was helmed by a cardinal. The carriage stopped slowly in front of the palace. The guards were all standing neatly on both sides of the gate of the palace. A red carpet was extended from the gate, all the way to the spot where the carriage stopped. The Foreign Affairs Minister Harquis led Lin Li onto the red carpet, and they walked past the guards before entering the majestic royal palace of the Leaden Kingdom. Right from the beginning to the end, everything was carried out with diplomatic etiquette, which Lin Li found to be a novelty. However, those were nothing considering his current identity. Even a level 23 legendary mage deserved respect from the king. Although the interior of the palace was gilded and brilliant, it did not attract too much of Lin Li's attention. After all, he had already seen Osric's mausoleum and the Sky Castle. Hence, it couldn't really be considered luxurious in comparison. The High Elves were really the epitome of living in luxury, and their pursuit of everything luxurious was something that humans could not compare to. Lin Li followed Harquis all the way to the hall where the king received the foreign diplomats. As the guards in front slowly opened the doors for them, they were greeted with a clear view of the hall. As the door opened, King Sinelli, who was initially sitting on the throne, slowly made his way down the stairs and walked towards Lin Li smilingly. Your Majesty, this is the owner of the Tower of Dusk, Master Felix, said the Foreign Affairs Minister, Harquis. He then turned to look at Lin Li, and said, Master Felix, this is His Majesty, King Sinelli. Queldela was a surname of the Leaden Kingdom's royalty, and originated from the High Elves language. It was said that the Leaden Kingdom did have some ties with the High Elves during the Dark Age, though it was unknown what their relationship was. Perhaps only the true successor of the Leaden Kingdom would know the truth. Although the relationship between the King of Leaden and the High Elves was unclear, Lin Li felt that King Sinelli was rather handsome, and he seemed to resemble the High Elves a little, though Lin Li was unsure if it wasn't just a misconception. Of course, it was not that there were no outstanding humans in terms of looks. Lin Li reckoned that he was probably misled by the surname. It's my utmost honor to see you, Your Majesty. Lin Li bowed slightly to King Sinelli out of respect, despite everything that happened to the caravan previously. Don't stand on ceremony, Master Felix. It's my pleasure to see you, the youngest legendary mage in the Felon Kingdom. Sinelli smiled and bowed before gesturing for Lin Li to take a seat. Instead of returning to the throne, he sat down beside Lin Li. Sinelli's move shocked the Foreign Affairs Minister Harquis, but after thinking about the rumors that surfaced in the past 2 days, he didn't find it that unacceptable, because there was a new decree put in place by the Pope. Looking at King Sinelli, who was seated beside him, Lin Li didn't feel flattered at all, and simply had a better impression of him. After a few polite exchanges, Lin Li asked about Sinelli's purpose in seeing him this time. After all, he was not a real envoy of the Felon Kingdom, and he could only represent the Tower of Dusk. Sinelli had carefully studied the information about Lin Li. Although it was not very detailed, he still managed to gain some understanding of Lin Li's character. Hence, after hearing Lin Li's question, Sinelli didn't hide anything, and simply truthfully said, "Master Felix, I invited you here this time mainly to discuss the matters of trade." "Oh? Your Majesty, please go ahead," Lin Li said while showing some interest. Most of the Tower of Dusk's main commercial networks were in the Felon Kingdom, and their foreign transactions were few. The greatest one thus far was still the purchase of magical crystal cannons from the Dwarf Kingdom. Although the most famous potions of the Tower of Dusk were available for sale in the Leaden Kingdom, most of the transactions were done through partner channels, and there were only a few of such channels for the Tower of Dusk. Hence, the Leaden Kingdom was basically considered an undeveloped virgin land for the Tower of Dusk. However, Lin Li was interested not in the sales of potions, but in the rich mineral deposits in the Leaden Kingdom. In terms of herbs, Lin Li already had the Elven Kingdom to provide a continuous supply of the best herbs in Amril from the Emerald Forest. However, the Tower of Dusk had always been greatly restricted in terms of forging. Otherwise, they would have long replaced the Marathon family, and become the largest army equipment manufacturer in the Felon Kingdom. Apart from the Brilliant Shrine, the Leaden Kingdom was most famous for its high-quality ores. The Leaden Kingdom had rich supplies of numerous rare magical metals. Even the Dwarf Kingdom, which was famous for forging, had to get their magical metals from the Leaden Kingdom. Although the Tower of Dusk could also get their ores and minerals imported from the Leaden Kingdom, the quantity they could get was far from what they needed, and the prices were sky-high too. After all, there were 2 or more middlemen involved in transactions. During each handover, the inversion would increase the value of the ore by a large amount, and it would be hard to suppress it for the Tower of Dusk. If the Tower of Dusk could do without the middlemen and directly import the goods from the Leaden Kingdom, the price would probably decrease by more than half. If the Tower of Dusk's forging business was no longer restricted by the availability of ores, the Tower of Dusk would probably be able to take over the Marathon family's share of the business in no time, especially with Lin Li's instructions for the blacksmiths. Although Lin Li wasn't a petty person, he did bear grudges. Besides, he would be able to generate a large amount of income while taking revenge. Of course, although Lin Li was very interested in negotiating with King Sinelli, he didn't show much of his interest when he was in front of him. He didn't think that Sinelli would give him valueless things like mining rights. Perhaps business interests and rights were the same. When they were specifically discussing the details of the trade, Sinelli, the king of the Leaden Kingdom, showed his incredible talent in managing business. Hence, he wasn't calculative about the negotiation, and achieving a win-win solution was the main purpose of the business negotiation. That would ensure that both parties got what they wanted while making their due profits. Allowing just one party to gain meant the failure of the negotiation, and Sinelli managed to achieve a win-win solution rather well. He ensured his own benefits while making sure that Lin Li didn't feel like it was unacceptable. Lin Li had to admit that he couldn't quite resist Sinelli's shrewd attacks in business negotiations, because he had no experience in doing business at all. If it weren't for the fact that he had already seen through Sinelli's hidden intentions, Lin Li wouldn't have gone ahead with the negotiation. He would have left it to the professionals. In fact, when Lin Li heard Sinelli mention the business cooperation, Lin Li could already tell that Sinelli's true agenda was to establish a friendship with himself. Otherwise, the Minister of Commerce would have been there with them. Lin Li was also impressed with the method that Sinelli chose. He was not as impatient as others, and did not make promises confidently right at the start of the conversation in a bid to forge closer ties with Lin Li. Such people usually ended up scaring away competent individuals, leaving behind only the unreliable ones. Sinelli showed that he was patient enough when handling this matter, and placed appropriate emphasis on his own interests, while being generous with the benefits that Lin Li deserved. He knew how to manage the relationship between the two parties well. Of course, Lin Li also knew that once the cooperative relationship between the two sides was stabilized, it would probably be time for Sinelli to put forward some conditions. However, Lin Li did not feel irked by that, because business was business, and mutual benefits were important. The future cooperations would have to depend on how much Sinelli could offer. In Amril, the price to pay for a level 23 legendary mage was very high. Even though Lin Li didn't know much about what Sinelli thought, he could roughly guess what was going on, and he felt some sympathy for him. If he were to be in Sinelli's position, he probably wouldn't be willing to continue staying silent and be a puppet like king for the rest of his life. Although it was thrilling to hold massive power, it was actually more horrendous than having nothing to one's name. In fact, although the current Leaden Kingdom was almost entirely controlled by the Brilliant Shrine, it had allegedly been established without relying on the Brilliant Shrine. There was a well-known legend about the establishment of the Leaden Kingdom. The legend had it that the founder of the Leaden Kingdom, Solon Quelsala, one of the most powerful sword sages of Amril, was the closest human friend of the Dragon of Time Nozdemo, one of the dragon aspects. The Dragon of Time Nozdemo was the one who supported Solon Quelsala in building the powerful Leaden Kingdom at the end of the Dark Age. It was said that Dragon of Time Nozdemo had the power to travel through time and space, control the passage of time, and shuttle between the past, the present, and the future at will. It used those powers and abilities to guard the time of Amril and allow the world to develop in the right direction. With the support of the Dragon of Time, it was probably not difficult to build a powerful kingdom. Of course, there was no evidence to determine if Solon Quelsala had established the Leaden Kingdom with the help of the Dragon of Time or not. However, as the founding leader of the Leaden Kingdom, Solon Quelsala had indeed made his name known in history, and that was an indisputable fact. If he didn't have the help and support of the Dragon of Time, it could only show that he was extremely outstanding. Unfortunately, after the fall of a generation of heroes, the Leaden Kingdom experienced a chaotic civil war, and was then attacked and subdued by the neighboring nations. Initially, there were hopes for it to unify the powerful kingdoms of Amril, but it only managed to gain a foothold by relying on the Brilliant Shrine at last. Although the establishment of the Brilliant Shrine had little to do with the Leaden Kingdom would still be an unknown force if not for the mediation and deterrence provided by the Brilliant Shrine. After some negotiating, Lin Li reached a consensus on some commercial agreements with King Sinelli for the trading of potions and ores on behalf of the Tower of Dusk. Actually, the Tower of Dusk's potions had long been available for sale in the Leaden Kingdom, but because of various reasons, it was not very famous. After reading the information and asking Lin Li about it in detail, Sinelli was definitely tempted. In fact, gaining such a rich source of supply of advanced potions from Lin Li was a huge benefit to Sinelli even if he only managed to talk to Lin Li about business. However, there was definitely a price to pay for advanced potions. Although Sinelli was the head of a nation, it still wasn't an easy task for him to touch the treasury. Moreover, he did not dare to reveal anything about the plot that he had hatched. Otherwise, he would definitely be dethroned. Fortunately, Sinelli could tell that Lin Li was very interested in the ores, and thus put forward a proposal to exchange ores for potions with the Tower of Dusk. Not only would that benefit them both, it would also avoid arousing suspicion. That suggestion did not cause any damage or loss to Lin Li, and the only difference was the lack of gold coins. After all, barter was the most primal form of trade. As for the exchange ratio between the potions and ores, gold coins were just a standard for reference. If the potion was worth 1,000 gold coins, Lin Li would be receiving 1,000 gold coins worth of ores. After discussing the content of the business deal, Sinelli did not get the details written down on a contract, because some things were inappropriate to be written in black and white. Sinelli simply handed a token to Lin Li. The specific contract for the trading of ores and potions would be signed by the Tower of Dusk and the nobles. Lin Li left the palace and boarded the luxurious carriage, going back to Delano City. Recalling the negotiation process along the way, Lin Li sighed and thought to himself that if Sinelli were in a place where there was no suppression by the brilliant shrine, he could perhaps become a promising king. Unfortunately, the power of the brilliant shrine had compelled Sinelli to choose an extremely difficult path. Lin Li returned to the holy mountain of the brilliant shrine to see that the Pope Rosario's body had basically recovered. Hence, he finally had the opportunity to ask questions about theurgy. Although Lin Li had read the Light Bible before, he was just trying to figure out and grasp the concepts on his own, and he only managed to learn something because of the research that he had done on the debris of the star's holy light and power of light. However, he still had some doubts about the difficult questions and problems he encountered. Pope Rosario was a powerhouse of the sanctuary realm, and his attainment in holy light magic alone was probably unsurpassed in the entire Amrel. To Lin Li, being able to receive some guidance and tips from such a formidable sanctuary realm powerhouse was just as good as the gains he had obtained in Osric's mausoleum. Due to his mastery of the debris of the stars, holy light, Lin Li had a great advantage when he studied holy light magic, and it was more than just rapid progress. The studying of holy light magic, coupled with Rosario's tips, gave Lin Li a deeper understanding of the laws of holy light and a better mastery of it. The two could be considered complements for each other, and shared a linear relationship. When one improved, the other would improve significantly too. It would be reflected in Lin Li's strength. Back in Osric's mausoleum, Lin Li had already vaguely seen the threshold to level 24. After learning on the holy mountain for a period of time, Lin Li mastered holy light magic and the power of the debris of the star's holy light. The door of level 24 could be considered to have slowly opened up for Lin Li, who was only one step away from becoming a true level 24 legendary mage. Of course, during this time, the higher-ups of the brilliant shrine who were keen on pharmaceutics were also ecstatic about their gains, in addition to the improvement of their own strength. Lin Li was to them just like Rosario to Lin Li. In terms of pharmaceutics, there was probably no one in Amrel who had achieved as much as Lin Li did in pharmaceutics. A few answers to their questions were enough to make them feel euphoric. Lin Li lived a disciplined and routine life on the holy mountain, which even made him unaware of the passage of time. Every morning, Lin Li would go to the Dawn Cathedral on the top of the holy mountain, ask Pope Rosario about theurgy, and then hear Rosario's stories about the Dark Age. In the afternoon, he would give some tips and answer the pharmaceutics questions from the archbishops and the chief judge. When he was in the mood for it, he would also demonstrate the preparation of several potions. At night, Lin Li would make a summary of everything he had learned in the day, and then get immersed in the precious classics collected by the brilliant shrine. However, Lin Li also read other books about the history of the brilliant shrine and various other myths. After exploring the Sky Castle and Osric's mausoleum, Lin Li knew that the myths and legends might not be all fictitious in Amrel. It was good to have more knowledge, for one would never know when they might need it. However, when he read the information about the brilliant shrine, Lin Li discovered that there was actually very little information about the once famous paladin Rodhart, who was also now the Retribution Knight in the underground palace of the Dragon Mountains. Even in some history books about that era, the information about him was vague, and there wasn't a single mention of his name at all. However, after he thought about it carefully, Lin Li could more or less understand the reason for it. After all, he was the Retribution Knight who had killed countless lives. Regardless of how much he had contributed to the brilliant shrine, no one was willing to mention him. Of course, for Lin Li, it was rather sad. The two pieces of the debris of the stars, polar snow and raging flames, were still in the underground palace of the Dragon Mountain range. Once he fulfilled the order placed by the Felon Kingdom, he would be able to get the magical crystals of the ice and fire twin dragons. It would then be time for him to get the two pieces of the debris of the stars and the ice and fire magical domain. When he'd gone to the underground palace previously, the Retribution Knight hadn't given him any trouble. However, Lin Li reckoned that the Retribution Knight would definitely attack him if he had made too much commotion in the underground palace. Although Kanoris said that Prophet Willan had severely injured Retribution Knight Rodhart once, Lin Li wouldn't really use the unreliable piece of news as his safety net. Retribution Knight Rodhart had been hibernating in the underground palace for numerous years, and God knew if it might change after waking up. During his peak, he had actually reached the sanctuary realm. During the exploration of Osric's mausoleum, an arbitrator of the Supreme Council managed to subdue the 3 undead lords in Shadowglen with just one simple trick. The power of the sanctuary realm was something that could not be resisted by the legendary powerhouses. Even for the legendary powerhouses, the gap was still worlds apart. There was still the perfect body of Osric previously lying in the crystal coffin in Osric's mausoleum, which gave Lin Li nightmare-like memories. At that time, Lin Li was not alone, and was actually in the company of several other legendary powerhouses like Anduin, Rosen, Aldwin, and the numerous servants Lin Li had summoned. If it weren't for the fact that the perfect body had been restricted, Lin Li and the rest wouldn't have been able to come back alive. Besides, even if Lin Li's combined powers were on par with those of the powerhouses of the sanctuary realm, he wouldn't be that foolish as to go toe-to-toe with the powerhouses of the sanctuary realm. Although polar snow and raging flames were important, he would definitely incur great losses if he were to deplete all of his energy. However, what made Lin Li feel dismayed was the fact that he did not find any information about Rodhart, and that the information about Willan was mostly irrelevant too. Prophet Willan was said to be a so-called son of the Holy Light, and there had been plenty of information about him, but most of it was about how he had annihilated the demons that harmed the humans, and how the civilians worshipped him, allowed him to spread the doctrine of the Holy Light, and so on. There was no information at all about Willan's origins and what magical weapons he had used. Lin Li even wanted to ask Rosario about it several times before, but he didn't dare to mention it. After all, Rosario would definitely be upset about such a shameful past event, regardless of how well-tempered he might be. He could ask about Prophet Willan, but he could never mention Rodhart, who was a disgrace to the brilliant shrine. The moonstone-decorated lamp in the room was radiating a gentle glow. Lin Li closed the book in his hand while pinching his forehead gently. Although there were plenty of classic collected by the brilliant shrine, Lin Li had already read most of them, and didn't have much hope to find out more about Rodhart left. Lin Li was indeed a bit frustrated at first, because it would be unlikely for him to find any more information about Rodhart anywhere else, since he couldn't find any in the brilliant shrine. The unreliable living encyclopedia Canoris also had limited knowledge of Rodhart. Otherwise, Lin Li wouldn't have had to look through the books. It seemed that he had to postpone his plans of acquiring polar snow and raging flames even if he were to obtain the magical crystals of the ice and fire twin dragons. He would at least have to have the strength to fight against the powerhouses of the sanctuary realm. Otherwise, the risk would be huge. However, Lin Li felt less dejected after an unexpected discovery. He closed the book and leaned back against the chair with an ordinary-looking stone that could even be considered ugly. The stone didn't give off any magical waves at all, and no one in Amril could recognize it, except for Lin Li and Canoris. The ugly stone was the magical crystal that Lin Li had obtained when he killed the Dragon of Destruction before he arrived in Amril. Back in the abyss of Tharlan, Lin Li had tried to take out that magical crystal that didn't belong to Amril in order to defeat the Lord of Darkness, which was a projection of the Dragon of Destruction. Long before Lin Li arrived in Amril, it was said that the Dragon of Destruction was killed by the Immortal King. The skeleton of the Dragon of Destruction was used for the construction of the Sky Castles, and the magical crystal of the Dragon of Destruction was taken away by the Immortal King. Tutankhamun of the Blackstone Mountains was one of them. Though it was unknown if he was a child of the Dragon of Destruction or the Immortal King. According to Canoris' suggestion, Lin Li had chosen the same method as the Immortal King, and he hoped to use the magical crystal to hatch a formidable figure like Tutankhamun. However, the Dragon of Destruction Azardas was the dragon aspect of Amril, and was said to be able to challenge existences like gods. How could it be easy to incubate the magical crystal? The process of incubation was extremely difficult yet easy at the same time. It required the constant induction of spiritual force into the magical crystal to activate the soul brand in the Dragon of Destruction. According to Canoris, it required more than 100 years for the Immortal King to hatch the magical crystal of the Dragon of Destruction. Of course, although the process of incubation was boring and monotonous, it came with some benefits. Not only did the magical crystal of the Dragon of Destruction have powerful and incomparable power, it also contained the two laws, evilness and darkness, as well as the experience and knowledge gained by the Dragon of Destruction. However, they were all hidden in the soul brand, and it was impossible to directly absorb them from the magical crystal. One could only try to obtain them when the spiritual force merged with the magical crystal. Lin Li heard from Kanoris that the incubation of the Dragon of Destruction's magical crystal was a mandatory daily affair. However, whenever the spiritual force was injected, it seemed to be sucked into a vortex. Although there was indeed some feedback, there wasn't much of an effect on the soul brand. In fact, that was also very normal. The Immortal King was formidable, and yet it still took 100 years to hatch the Dragon of Destruction's magical crystal. Although it was mostly for Lin Li to learn the rules and knowledge as much as possible, the amount of information he could receive was also greatly related to his strength. Although Lin Li had plenty of mental strength when he wasn't learning magic, he was still far from the Immortal King. Even with the Evil Eye Tyrant's magical crystal, which provided continuous improvement of mental strength, Lin Li couldn't be compared to the Immortal King at all. Indeed, he could also obtain the nomological knowledge contained in the magical crystal. However, it was as difficult as squeezing oil from stone. During his days at the Brilliant Shrine, he didn't have much to worry about, because the ugly stone did not emit the slightest magical waves, hence, he continued to go about his daily routine. However, when Lin Li was going about his routine, he discovered the soul brand in the magical crystal of the Dragon of Destruction, and there seemed to be a slight fluctuation therein. Lin Li knew that it was definitely not because his mental strength had improved, and he even began to suspect that it was just a misconception. After all, it had been more than 2 years since he had begun incubating the magical crystal. Even though his mental strength had changed dramatically, he probably still couldn't be compared to the Immortal King. However, after receiving the feedback from the magical crystal, Lin Li clearly felt that it had indeed increased. Perhaps it was because of the environment there. After all, they were on the holy mountain of the Brilliant Shrine, where the power of holy light was everywhere. Would it have some impact on the magical crystal that contained the laws of darkness and destruction? The only thing Lin Li could do was guess. Of course, in order to verify that guess, he would have to experiment with his debris of the star's holy light, even though that could cause him to die a horrible death. Besides, Lin Li did not care about wasting time on meaningless guessing. Although the information he got from the magical crystal this time was not much, it was enough for him to absorb and digest for a while. Fortunately, even with such a change, the magical crystal still did not emit the slightest magical wave. Otherwise, Lin Li would be in trouble if anyone were to find out that he was studying dark force in the Brilliant Shrine's territory. A powerful existence like the Dragon of Destruction was a guardian of the laws of destruction and darkness. Coupled with the experience and knowledge accumulated over countless years, it would be enough for Lin Li to deplete his energy. Fortunately, during this time, Lin Li received plenty of pointers from Rosario. Although they were all about the power of the holy light and holy light magic, most of them were connected. Light and darkness seemed to be two extreme opposing forces. However, it was the very contradiction that gave them similarities. Hence, Lin Li didn't find it difficult to learn this time, even though there wasn't plenty of information in the feedback from the magical crystal. After the visit to the Brilliant Shrine, Lin Li had not only made great progress in using the power of light, he had also learned a lot about the dark force. That was something that Lin Li had never expected. In the past few days, Lin Li basically read through all of the classics collected by the Brilliant Shrine, but he still had no clue about the information regarding Rodheart. After returning the last batch of books, Lin Li couldn't help but ask the clergyman who was in charge of the books to check if there were any unread books and materials that he could read. The dusty hut was just like a rubbish dump which contained plenty of books scattered all over the place, giving off an aura of decomposition. Lin Li stared at everything in the hut in shock and disbelief. According to the clergyman, no one had opened the hut for hundreds of years. It was not because of any bans, but because there were plenty of new copies of those books that could be found outside. Hence, no one would bother going to the hut to read them. However, Lin Li's eyes glistened when he heard that no one had opened the hut for hundreds of years. Perhaps what he was looking for was in that pile of old papers. Lin Li sent the clergyman away, and began to get engrossed in the books all by himself. He rummaged through each book carefully. In fact, it wouldn't take him too much effort to do it, since he had basically read all the books outside anyway. He just had to look for the ones he hadn't seen before. Damn it, no wonder this matter got erased from the records in the later eras. So this is what happened. Lin Li's efforts paid off. After a painstaking session of rummaging, he finally returned to his room on the holy mountain with a torn and tattered scroll. He dismissed Los and the other people who came to ask him about pharmaceutics under the pretext that he had gained some insight into holy light magic. He then carefully closed the door and laid the scroll on the table, only to be greeted with lines of blurred words. There was another unexpected reason for Lin Li's failure to find any information about Rodhart despite having searched for such a long time. It was because Prophet Willen, who was known as the son of the Holy Light, and the notorious Retribution Knight Rodhart were actually twin brothers. Lin Li had actually heard some legends and rumors about what Rodhart had done. The information recorded had more or less confirmed the legends. Legends had it that Rodhart was an orphan who got adopted by the Brilliant Shrine as a child. That was true, except that his brother Willen was adopted together with him. In fact, Willen becoming the son of the Holy Light perhaps had something to do with Rodhart getting adopted by the Brilliant Shrine. Just like the other orphans adopted by the Brilliant Shrine, Rodhart and Willen had received strict education, imparted to them by the Brilliant Shrine ever since they were children. When Rodhart was 15 years old, he joined the Court of Heresy with several other teenagers who were as outstanding as him after passing the court's assessment. At that time, his younger brother Willen had also become a disciple of the Pope because of his incredible talent. When Rodhart was 32 years old, he entered the legendary realm and took over the position as the chief judge, after which he gradually began to rise in Anrel. Together with the actions carried out by the Court of Heresy, the dominance that the young referee of heresy, Rodhart, had shown as well as his astonishing abilities made him get labeled as the strongest paladin since the establishment of the Brilliant Shrine. Rodhart could be considered to have reached the pinnacle of life, and he had even become more famous than the Pope. Countless people in the entire Brilliant Shrine idolized him too. During this period, Willen, who was far more talented than his elder brother, was less known even though he was the Pope's disciple. However, it was obvious that the Brilliant Shrine was deliberately trying to help him keep a low profile because of his identity as the son of the Holy Light in order to keep him safe until he grew to adulthood. At that time, the Darkness Shrine had yet to fall, and was still an opponent that the Brilliant Shrine dared not belittle. In fact, it was even more powerful than the Brilliant Shrine back then, and Willen could be considered the hope for the rise of the Brilliant Shrine. If the Darkness Shrine had found out that he was the son of the Holy Light, they might have really killed him. Afterwards, Rodhart suddenly resigned as the head referee, and gradually vanished from sight. The next time he appeared was 100 years later. However, at that time, he had already become the controversial Retribution Knight who commanded a powerful legion of Death Knights that bulldozed through the entire Breezy Plains. During that disaster, the population of the Breezy Plains declined sharply by more than a third, and the bustling cities turned into ruins because of the Death Knights. When Rodhart disappeared as a paladin, his younger brother became a prophet of the Brilliant Shrine, and the people in Anrel gradually knew him as the son of the Holy Light. At that time, Willen was said to have possessed sanctuary-level power, and his attainments in holy light magic had even surpassed those of the Pope of the Brilliant Shrine. Although there was no witness during the battle between Willen and the Supreme Council arbitrator Apophis, Apophis admitted later that Willen was invincible and that he admired him greatly. It was also because of that battle that the presence of Prophet Willen greatly improved the reputation of the Brilliant Shrine. Even the Supreme Council was suppressed. Hence, when Rodhart became the Retribution Knight and commanded the Death Knights to wreak havoc in the Breezy Plains, the two brothers finally met again. However, this time, Rodhart's younger brother Willen had already been tasked with purifying his brother who had become a Retribution Knight. There was no information about Rodhart even in the document that Lin Li had found. However, after the battle, the disaster in the breezy plains finally ended, and Prophet Willan also disappeared for some unknown reason. He never appeared in the Brilliant Shrine again. All of a sudden, Willan was no longer around to succeed the papal throne and guard the glorious Brilliant Shrine. Hence, they immediately got attacked by various forces. There was huge damage to their power, and they even almost got subdued again by the fallen Darkness Shrine. After reading the information, Lin Li was both surprised and disappointed by the content because there was no record of the battle between Willan and Rodhart. Hence, there was no way Lin Li would know about the powers of the Retribution Knight Rodhart. However, Lin Li discovered a secret message in the data. Before Rodhart fell, he actually went to the Darkness Shrine once. At that time, Willan actually went together with Rodhart. There was no information about the reason for their visit to the Darkness Shrine, but not long after they left, there was a major change in the Darkness Shrine. The Darkness Shrine, which could initially go toe-to-toe against the Brilliant Shrine, almost fell apart overnight, and never rose again since then. What exactly did Rodhart and Willan do, and what happened to the Darkness Shrine? Although Lin Li found out some things from the information, he had even more doubts. Lin Li vaguely felt that the answer seemed to be in the Darkness Shrine. Hence, he reckoned that it would be necessary to go to the Darkness Shrine. However, despite having made a decision, Lin Li didn't leave the Brilliant Shrine immediately. There were very few opportunities for him to get some pointers from a powerhouse of the Sanctuary Realm. Lin Li had no idea what was awaiting him in the Darkness Shrine, hence, he naturally wouldn't let go of any opportunity to improve his abilities. Pope Rosario also showed great patience when Lin Li consulted him. In fact, he was even more serious than when he was teaching his own disciples. Although Lin Li was not his own disciple, or even a believer of the Brilliant Shrine, and he didn't show any signs of being related to the Son of the Holy Light, Rosario had already determined that Lin Li definitely had something to do with the Son of the Holy Light the Brilliant Shrine had been trying to find. Actually, Lin Li had already been living on the Holy Mountain for a month, and time passed without him realizing it. Within that short period of time, Lin Li managed to grasp the concepts and all sorts of techniques rapidly. If Lin Li were to change into the robe of the Brilliant Shrine, no one would doubt if he was really a devout believer of the Holy Light. At this moment, a priest from the Darkness Shrine, who was dressed in a black robe, finally arrived at the foot of the Holy Mountain. Although Lin Li was still hesitant, it was already the second time that Sendros had sent someone to invite him to the Darkness Shrine, and he couldn't bring himself to delay it any further. This time, Sendros had sent a legendary-level priest who flew straight to the Brilliant Shrine using the power of flight. Clearly, Sendros had begun to get impatient. After saying goodbye to Pope Rosario and Inglos, Lin Li proceeded to the foot of the Holy Mountain and saw Priest Belisi. If it weren't for the conspicuous black robe that he was wearing, Belisi would look similar to an ordinary human who was in his 40s. Although his face was pale, it was still normal. Although there was some darkness in the magical wave that he was emanating, there was no death aura, and he was clearly specialized in dark magic. Master Felix, the High Priest has sent me to invite you to the Darkness Shrine as soon as possible, said Belisi. Although Belisi had never seen Lin Li before, Sendros had definitely told him what Lin Li was like. The fact that Lin Li was in his 20s and had legendary strength was enough for Belisi to recognize Lin Li. It's that urgent? Let's set off immediately, then, said Lin Li, who immediately used his power of flight to travel to the Darkness Shrine. Of course it'd be urgent. However, they were in the territory of the Brilliant Shrine. Although Belisi did not have to worry about the people of the Brilliant Shrine harming him. The omnipresent aura of light made him feel particularly uncomfortable to the extent that he didn't want to stay there any second longer. He only managed to pull through because he was a practitioner of dark magic. Unless one was at Sendros level, a necromancer would definitely suffer permanent damage there. The canyon that the Darkness Shrine was located in was actually relatively close to the breezy plains. However, Lin Li had set off from the City of Dawn, which was indeed rather far away. Fortunately, there were no obstacles in the sky. If they were to go there by foot, they would probably take 2 or 3 months to reach the vicinity. Even though they flew there, they only managed to reach the canyon on the second night. The deep night canyon in between the mountains looked just like a huge mouth cracking open in the earth. The bright moonlight seemed rather daunting, but everything inside the canyon seemed to be buried in infinite darkness. It was the sanctuary of darkness where light would never shine. Lin Li could even feel the dark roaring. Under the lead of Belisi, Lin Li entered the night canyon and looked up. The bright moonlight in the sky was somehow covered with a layer of blood that seemed to symbolize the disastrous war in the Dark Age. Lin Li followed Belisi to the large and gloomy canyon, and a majestic shrine gradually emerged from the darkness. He had just left the brilliant shrine, yet he was now in the night canyon of the darkness shrine. The stark contrast made Lin Li feel extremely shocked. Although the darkness shrine had lost most power long ago, Lin Li could still imagine how glorious the darkness shrine used to be. The believers of the darkness shrine believed in the doctrine of darkness, but they did not discriminate against holy light. To them, light and darkness were not natural enemies. Only the presence of light could bring out darkness. Only then would they treasure the dark more. Although the darkness shrine and the brilliant shrine had been against each other for more than 1,300 years, they were just competing to dominate the world. Regardless of the difference in strength between the two parties, the stronger party had never thought of destroying the other party. Even at the beginning, where the darkness shrine had just experienced the disastrous war which caused it to almost collapse overnight, the brilliant shrine had not taken the opportunity to eradicate them. It was because fighting with the darkness shrine at that time was no longer meaningful. The darkness shrine was extremely weak, hence, there was already an outcome. The brilliant shrine rightfully dominated Amril. Of course, the cessation of the conflict did not mean that the darkness shrine had given up, but rather that it became their motivation. After that huge disaster, the darkness shrine did not go into a slump, but instead accumulated their power in the dark. In the recent decades, they even began to show signs of returning to their heyday. Although the darkness shrine still could not be compared to the brilliant shrine now, it was second, or rather third, only to the Supreme Council and the brilliant shrine in the entire Amril. They would perhaps rise back to glory after a few hundred years of conscientious management. If you're enjoying my content, please consider donating a coffee. Or checking out my shirts on TeePublic. Lin Li had just come from the brilliant shrine. Although he had seen the powerful strength of the brilliant shrine, he could also sense that they were declining a little. Since there were no competitors, the brilliant shrine gradually stopped being aggressive and motivated. Apart from Pope Rosario and a few higher-ups of the brilliant shrine, the believers of the brilliant shrine had probably been taking everything for granted since a long time ago. There was a square, paved with obsidian magical gemstones, in front of the majestic shrine. However, when Lin Li looked down from above, he could see that there were numerous cracks and deep grooves that seemed to have been made by axes and swords in the square. It was as if an extremely tragic battle had taken place in the square before. However, the damaged square did not seem ruined, but instead gave off an even more menacing vibe. There were some people standing in the square under the lead of the high priest of the darkness shrine, Sendros, who had 5 people of different shapes standing behind them. The ones at the back were the ordinary priests of the darkness shrine. The scene was extremely grand, and given the current status of the darkness shrine, there were very few people in Amril they would show such great respect to. Lin Li didn't find anything strange about Sendros and the rest who were standing in the square. He reckoned that Sendros had already received the news of their arrival as soon as they entered the night canyon. Lin Li didn't fly too close, and instead landed slowly on a spot that was about 300 to 400 meters away from them before walking towards Sendros. "Welcome to the darkness shrine, Master Felix," Sendros said in a hoarse voice. A stiff smile formed on his pale face, which was extremely daunting. The people behind Sendros were clueless, but Belisi, who had come with Lin Li, couldn't believe his eyes at this moment. He had been in the darkness shrine for numerous years. But he had never seen the high priest smiling before, even though it seemed rather terrifying. Belisi knew that High Priest Sendros valued Lin Li, whom he had invited, rather greatly, but he had not expected Lin Li to be so important that Sendros would actually come out to greet and receive him personally with a smile, which was very rare of him. At this time, he couldn't help but secretly rejoice about the fact that he didn't disrespect Lin Li along the way. Otherwise, he would never be able to escape the wrath of the high priest Sendros even though he was a priest. Master Sendros, I'm very sorry for taking such a long time to come here, said Lin Li, who began to feel a little embarrassed. After all, Sendros had invited him already in the Blackstone Mountains, and Lin Li had been pushing him away and delaying the matter until now because of various reasons. Sendros was the chief high priest of the Darkness Shrine and its actual leader. In the current Darkness Shrine, he was the actual leader of the entire Anril's believers of darkness. Even though he could not compare to Pope Rosario of the Brilliant Shrine in terms of status, he was probably not too inferior. He personally brought 5 high priests and numerous followers to the square to welcome Lin Li. It was obvious how important Lin Li was to him. Good that you're here, Master Felix. This way, please, let me introduce you to these priests, said Sendros. He didn't blame Lin Li for turning up late, though he gave off an icy cold vibe. The terrifying smile on his face had also disappeared, but there was a look of enthusiasm in his gaze. The people behind Sendros were, strictly speaking, not actual humans. The first high priest, Kulostine, was said to be the oldest pure-blood vampire in the entire Anril. As a result, he was called the ancestor of vampires. Hence, the mana waves that he emitted were much stronger than those of the undead lords in the Shadowglen. Of course, he was not the progenitor of the vampires, he was merely closer to a direct descendant of such a vampire. The 3 undead lords in the Shadowglen were level 23 powerhouses in the legendary realm. They only seemed to be somewhat incompetent previously because their opponent was the formidable Magard of the Sanctuary realm. After all, the difference between the legendary realm and the Sanctuary realm was too huge. Even those who were at the peak of the legendary realm could not fight the powerhouses of the Sanctuary realm. However, in Anril, there were only a few such powerhouses. Even Lin Li would face difficulty in dealing with an undead lord of the Shadowglen if he didn't use any debris of the stars. The ancestor of the vampires, Kulostine, was almost on the same level as the 3 undead lords, and was perhaps even more powerful. However, generic vampires tended to resemble human assassins. In fact, vampires could be considered the most outstanding natural assassins. However, the vampire Kulostine was dressed like a dark mage, and he was also emitting pure dark magical waves. Next to the vampire Kulostine was a necromancer named Zokila, whose thin and petite body was wrapped tightly in a black robe. The white hood of the robe concealed his face completely in the darkness. Even when he was responding to Sendro's introduction, all that could be seen beneath the hood were 2 palpitating soul fires. As he was a high priest, the magical waves of the necromancer Zokila were extremely faint like stagnant water and full of death. However, Lin Li could feel that the necromancer Zokila was likely to be more dangerous than the vampire Kulostine. Lin Li had encountered plenty of necromancers before, but Zokila seemed to be the most terrifying one thus far, apart from Sendros. Of course, the ghost in the Sky Castle was an exception because that creature was far beyond a necromancer. In order to enter the world of the undead, he was probably going to become the actual king of the undead. To be honest, Lin Li had yet to come up with a solution to snatch the Sky Castle back, and he reckoned that the Sky Castle had probably already been engulfed completely by undead creatures. The 3rd high priest of the Darkness Shrine was a werewolf with a wolf's head and a human body. He had silvery gray hair and a stature of more than 2 meters, making him look oppressive and daunting. He was wearing nothing but a simple leather armor consisting of 2 shoulder pads and a black breastplate that only protected the vital area where his heart laid. His exposed muscles seemed just like forged steel, and obviously contained unimaginable explosive power. He was Palladio, a high priest of the Darkness Shrine and the head of the night werewolves. Although he was a werewolf, he was different from tyrannical beast men, and their appearance aside, their bloodlines were completely unrelated. They did not believe in the god of beasts, and only worshipped the god of darkness. They were the most powerful warriors in the dark night, and hunted their enemies beneath the moonlight. However, during the day, they would turn into humans. Lin Li had come in contact with numerous human sword sages, but Palladio was probably the strongest warrior he had ever encountered. Of course, the perfect body manipulated by Osric's soul brand was an exception since it was the greatest masterpiece of Osric's life, after all. However, due to the issues with the degree of fusion, the power of the perfect body manipulated by Kenoris was unknown. Next, the fourth high priest Jurgula was an actual lich whose thin body was wrapped tightly in a black robe. His skull was also covered in dead skin, and there was a large eternal night gemstone embellished in his skull. Compared to this lich, Lin Li's subordinate Ujfalusi was much inferior. It wouldn't be wrong to say that Jurgula was the king of liches. The last high priest, who seemed the most human-like to Lin Li, was a knight named Nostalo, who was clad in heavy armor from head to toe. However, his face was also completely covered by a visor, and the only thing that could be seen through it was his fiery gaze that shone through the gaps in the visor. Although the 5 high priests were extremely mysterious, Nostalo was the one whom Lin Li found to be the most peculiar. He did not detect any death aura from him, but he could not sense any aura of life either. In Lin Li's memory, it seemed that only those death knights who manipulated divine power were highly similar to him. However, Nostalo didn't emit any divine power, even though he also didn't give off any death aura. After being introduced to the 5 high priests, Lin Li indeed felt that they were formidable, even though they had declined over the years after the disaster that fell upon them. Regardless of how much they had deteriorated, an ordinary force still wouldn't be comparable to them. The 5 of them and the chief high priest Sendros formed the Darkness Council of the Darkness Shrine, and led the members of the Darkness Shrine out of the trauma of that war, and allowed them to rise to a position where no one in Anril would despise them. While Lin Li was observing the 5 high priests, they were also scrutinizing him, the young mage who was praised by Sendros. Everyone could tell how highly Sendros valued Lin Li. Although the 5 high priests did not know much about Lin Li, they also gave him due respect. After all, although Lin Li was young, he was genuinely emitting level 23 magical waves. It was no wonder that he was valued by Sendros. Not only did he enter the legendary realm at a young age, he even made it to level 23, which was an unprecedented feat in the history of the entire Anril. Even Juresco, the god of mages, was still preparing to enter the legendary realm when he was at Lin Li's age. If nothing went wrong, it would only be a matter of time before Lin Li entered the sanctuary realm. To their greater disbelief, the young prodigy Lin Li actually managed to achieve unprecedented accomplishments in pharmaceutics as well. The 5 high priests were also aware of the fact that Pope Rosario was poisoned by Viper's poison, and that Lin Li was the one who gave him the antidote. Previously, there had also been news of Rosario, who hadn't left the Holy Mountain in decades, suddenly appearing in the city of Sparta in the Leaden Kingdom. Clearly, Lin Li had gotten rid of the poison in Pope Rosario's body. In other words, Lin Li was likely to be an actual pharmaceutics guru. The role of a pharmaceutics guru was evident in the development of the Tower of Dusk. Within just more than 2 years, the Tower of Dusk had grown from a small fry that was disregarded by everyone to a force with status that made everyone look up to them. Although there were also various other factors involved, it was no doubt that Lin Li's attainments in pharmaceutics played a vital role. Truth be told, the 5 high priests would have thought that they were reading myths and hearing fictitious stories had they not known about the various information about Lin Li and the Tower of Dusk and been particularly trusting of Sendros. The 5 high priests greatly approved of and agreed with Sendros' approach. Although the Darkness Shrine had declined over the years, they definitely wouldn't ignore such a genius even during their heyday. However, they still wondered if they could really rely on the young mage Lin Li this time. As Sendros pulled Lin Li into the shrine affectionately, the 5 high priests who were following closely behind looked at each other. Although 2 of them had their faces hidden, they could still tell that the 2 were also worried and doubtful. They did not doubt the authenticity of the various information about the Tower of Dusk and the young mage Felik. However, they also knew that the chief high priest Sendros invited Lin Li to the Darkness Shrine this time not only for the purpose of forging closer ties, but also because of an important matter that involved their existence. Indeed, Lin Li's talent was very convincing, but talent simply meant that he had great potential which would perhaps allow him to progress faster than ordinary people, or go further than ordinary people. However, even if he was a genius, he still couldn't exert power of the sanctuary level at level 23. Compared to people of the same level, even a genius couldn't be that much stronger, and in fact, they might even have less experience due to the fact that they had advanced too quickly. Many people would perhaps never be able to enter the legendary realm throughout their lives, and entering the sanctuary realm was a far-fetched dream for most legendary powerhouses. Indeed, while Lin Li's talent would probably allow him to enter the sanctuary realm, he was still just a level 23 legendary mage at the moment. Could the fate of the Darkness Shrine really be left in his hands? The 5 high priests were not worried about Sendros doing anything that might harm the Darkness Shrine, but this time, even the powerful Darkness Shrine could not deal with the issue at hand. What could a level 23 legendary powerhouse do? Although the Darkness Shrine had somewhat deteriorated, it did not lack level 23 powerhouses. The chief high priest Sendros and the 5 high priests were all legendary level individuals. As for the power of the Tower of Dusk, they were indeed developing well under the management of Lin Li. Within just over 2 years, it had already surpassed the Dark Blade which had existed for hundreds of years, and become an incredible force in the breezy plains. However, compared to the Darkness Shrine, the Tower of Dusk was still rather small currently. If the Tower of Dusk was compared to a person, he could be called a genius, but the problem was actually the same. Regardless of how it developed in the future, it was still far from surpassing the Darkness Shrine, Supreme Council, and Brilliant Shrine. Lin Li naturally didn't know what the 5 high priests thought of him. It didn't matter as long as they were cordial on the surface. He was only there because of Sendros' invitation, and Sendros was showing him due respect by bringing so many people out to greet him. Lin Li even vaguely felt that it was too much. As Lin Li followed Sendros into the shrine, he finally had a more intuitive impression of this mysterious place in Amril. In various stories and legends, the Darkness Shrine was almost synonymous with the words horror and evil, and the Darkness Shrine was described as a spooky and filthy place. Of course, it was also because of the deliberate misleading done by the Brilliant Shrine. However, the demand for believers in the Darkness Shrine was far less than that of the Brilliant Shrine. No one bothered to retort or raise a dispute. Of course, not all of that was wrong. At least, for humans who naturally longed for light, passing through the night canyon to the square outside the shrine was indeed an eerie experience. However, in the shrine, there wasn't much of a spooky vibe, since there were rows of bright magic lamps, even though it was not as bright as day. According to the believers of darkness, darkness was their religion and their source of energy, but that did not mean that they would completely eradicate light. Although it was one of the most powerful forces in Amril, the decorations in the Darkness Shrine were not very luxurious, but they gave off a simple and elegant vibe which allowed everyone in there to feel extremely at peace. The ground that was paved with obsidian magical gemstones was smooth, flat, and reflective, resembling the starry night sky. Although black was not the main theme for the walls, roofs, and pillars, black was mandatory. All the other colors seemed to be meant for complementing black. Having gotten used to seeing luxurious decors, Lin Li felt comfortable in the Darkness Shrine both visually and spiritually. Everyone arrived in the hall and sat down separately. According to Sendros, Lin Li was a guest of honor, hence, he was allowed to sit next to him. The 5 high priests did not have any objection, even though they didn't think that Lin Li and the Tower of Dusk could be of any help to the Darkness Shrine in resolving the crisis at hand. They didn't look down on Lin Li, though. 2 years had passed since the incident in the Blackstone Mountains. For most people, 2 years or so was probably not enough for them to improve their own strength even by just 1 level. Although Sendros had long known that Lin Li was incredibly talented in magic, he knew that Lin Li had great accomplishments in pharmaceutics, and he could not help but be astonished by Lin Li's incredible attainments. The hall seemed rather quiet. Sendros and Lin Li were the only ones who were talking. The 5 high priests were seated quietly, and it was unknown if they were listening or busy thinking. Meanwhile, Sendros and Lin Li began talking about everything that happened in the Blackstone Mountains, to the Lord of Darkness in the Abyss of Tharlan, to the Sky Castle, the 7-realm spiral, and Lin Li's conflict with the Dark Blade. Regarding the matter of the conflict with the Dark Blade, Lin Li hypocritically expressed his apologies, 1. but obviously the dark blade was nothing in the eyes of the darkness shrine, and Sendros simply said that they'd been asking for it. Of course, they tacitly refrained from mentioning what the darkness shrine thought about the dark blade attacking the Tower of Dusk. After all, no matter who was at fault, the dark blade had become a thing of the past, and there was no need to bring them up and affect everyone's mood. At the mention of the powerful ghost in the sky castle, Sendros' face grew a little sullen. As he was a necromancer with abilities that were close to the sanctuary realm, no one knew the power of the undead heaven better than he did. Lin Li explained to everyone that he was lucky enough to have escaped by dashing into the teleportation portal at the last moment, but Sendros knew that it was impossible to escape from the undead heaven just by relying on luck alone. Not to mention, there were 36 towers that formed a psychic array. Without any special means, he would definitely have been pulled back by the powerful force. However, although Sendros could tell that Lin Li was hiding the matter, he still continued to question him. An ambiguous smile formed on his face when he heard Lin Li say that he had escaped from the undead heaven. It was as if he had already seen through Lin Li's tricks. Just like that, I was trapped in the chaotic flow of time and space for almost half a year. Fortunately, the teleportation portal was intact. Otherwise, I would have really been buried in a nether storm. After returning from the Haiga mountain range, I had no plans for a new adventure. However, I had plenty of things to handle at the Tower of Dusk, and when I was finally done, the people from the Alana Guild of Magic came to look for me. Hence, I had no choice but to delay the visit to your place again. Speaking of which, the matter with the Alana Guild of Magic was also an agreement that I made with them long ago. Lin Li did not notice Sendros' expression, and simply continued to talk about the exploration of Osric's mausoleum. Of course, it was nearly impossible to notice any expression on Sendros' stiff face. The bet made between the Alana Guild of Magic and the Adventurers Guild was rather well known, and had also become the laughingstock to countless people. Hence, Sendros and the rest were naturally aware of it. However, after listening to Lin Li's description, the 5 high priests became even more worried because they all knew that the president of the Adventurers Guild, Isekaied, was a smithing master. Since Lin Li could fulfill the bet, he was clearly at least a master of forging. If Sendros' purpose in seeing Lin Li this time was just for forging connections, it would naturally be better for Lin Li to be more competent. However, even forging masters and pharmaceutics gurus wouldn't be of any help to the Darkness Shrine this time. Time was equal for everyone. Regardless of how talented Lin Li, who was in his early 20s, was. 20 years wouldn't be longer for him compared to others. Even if he had been studying every day and night since he was born, he could at most allocate his time well, and schedule creating magic, potions, and forging for different time slots. Of course, Lin Li was competent, but it was undeniable that scheduling some of his limited time for other skills would definitely affect his learning of magic. The 5 high priests already had doubts about whether Lin Li could help the Darkness Shrine survive this crisis, and when they heard that Lin Li was also a master of forging, they began to feel even more apprehensive. Lin Li did not feel uncomfortable about their silence at all. After all, he was chatting with Sendros, and it would be normal for them not to intervene. While Sendros posed timely questions, Lin Li continued to answer, and told him about the matters regarding Osric's mausoleum, the 3 undead lords of the Shadowglen who had made a pact with Juresco, the massive immortal door, the whole other world outside the mausoleum, the huge alchemical undead, the 3 butchers of Osric like Angelano, and the fire demon king who had guarded the mausoleum for over a millennium. When Lin Li said that they actually managed to reach the 72nd floor of the abyss, and had a fierce battle with the legendary Zago demons, the 5 high priests seemed to have temporarily forgotten about their troubles as they listened to Lin Li's account attentively. Although they had all been living for countless years, everything that Lin Li had experienced in the past 2 years or so was probably more exciting than everything they had experienced in their entire lives. They gasped unanimously, especially when Lin Li mentioned the perfect body created by Osric lying in the crystal coffin. Osric was a mythical figure, and although Lin Li and others had merely fought the perfect body he created, it was definitely a wonderful experience. Although the 5 high priests were surprised, they did not re-evaluate Lin Li's abilities because of that matter. After all, they felt that Osric's perfect body probably might not have power that exceeded the sanctuary realm. Those who were in the sanctuary realm could be considered demigods. Hence, how could a mortal create a godlike body? Besides, Lin Li also said that the so-called perfect body was still bound by the crystal coffin, and could not exert its full power at all. If Lin Li knew what they were thinking, he would probably cuss his heart out immediately. What did you mean a wonderful experience? That perfect body that had Osric's soul brand possessed power of the sanctuary level. Besides, he also had the most bizarre and eerie debris of the stars, nothingness. That battle could be considered the most hopeless one that Lin Li had ever experienced since he arrived in Amril. The thought of the suppression he'd felt in it would still make him shudder. For Lin Li, there was no longer a point in hiding things about various incidents. His acquisition of the 3 relics of Juresco was also a well-known fact in the breezy plains, and he had also set the eternal furnace on the top of the Tower of Dusk. Ordinary people might not be able to identify it, but how could someone like Sendros be unaware of what it was? As for the perfect body created by Osric, Lin Li didn't mention that Kanoris was an ancient deity, and simply said that it was a demon Lord Osric had caught in the past. When they came to the topic of Lin Li's visit to the Darkness Shrine, Lin Li stopped for a moment, looked at Sendros, and continued, Master Sendros, Priest Jiker and Priest Belisi have both mentioned that you invited me here, this time, for something important. Would it be convenient for you to let me know what it is now? Ever since he left the brilliant shrine, Lin Li had been thinking about the matter, and trying to figure out what that important thing was. He did not think that Sendros merely wanted to listen to his stories. However, he also knew his own significance. Although he seemed rather competent at level 23, he was still far from being a true powerhouse. At least, the Darkness Shrine didn't lack someone of his level. It was true that Lin Li was irreplaceable only for the fact that he was a pharmaceutics guru. If Sendros needed him to make a potion, he could have just explained it directly from the start. There was no need to keep Lin Li in suspense at all. Before waiting for Sendros to answer Lin Li's questions, the priest Zokila, who had been seated quietly, suddenly said in a hoarse voice, Master Felik, the experience that you gained over the past 2 years is really shocking. Although you have been emphasizing that it was all based on luck, we all know that without a certain level of abilities and strength, it would have been impossible to seize the opportunity even if it had been in front of you. I have a few questions about magic that I'd like to discuss with you. Would you be interested? That matter concerned the existence of the Darkness Shrine, and it was even more serious than the matter of Pope Rosario being poisoned. The 5 high priests did not approve of letting Lin Li find out what the matter was about, since they still had no idea if Lin Li could be of any help to them or not. 1. The Dark Blade was affiliated with the shrine. Hence, after hearing Lin Li's question to Sendros, the high priest Zokila suddenly interjected. In addition to temporarily interjecting and interrupting them, he also intended on testing Lin Li. Lin Li didn't think too much about it, since Zokila sounded polite, and not in the least bit provocative. He thought that Zokila was perhaps really interested in discussion. He didn't mind being interrupted, and instead nodded and smiled. He then said to Zokila, You're being too formal, High Priest. I'm very glad to discuss magic with you. However, I don't know much about necromagic, so I might have to consult you instead. Lin Li was not an arrogant person, and High Priest Zokila had also shown him due respect. Of course, he would return the same respect. However, due to the fact that Zokila was a necromancer, Lin Li naturally thought that Zokila wanted to discuss necromagic with him. Although Lin Li had the debris of the stars, gloomy dark, and could be considered to have mastered the purest nomological power of darkness, necromagic was not simply the application of darkness nomological power, but a product of the combination of dark force and vitality. It was just like how Lin Li chose the traditional and orthodox method in alchemy. Although he had reached a fairly high level in alchemy, he was still far inferior to Angelano in terms of creating alchemy puppets. If they were to discuss dark magic, Lin Li could still make impeccable statements just based on his mastery of gloomy dark. However, necromagic was beyond his abilities. Zokila's face was still hidden in the shadow of his large hood, but he still seemed to be smiling. He then said in an unpleasantly hoarse voice, "It's not about necromagic, or any pure form of magic. It's about magic theories." "Oh, in this case, please guide me, High Priest," said Lin Li, who was much more interested after hearing that it was about magic theory. He did not think that Zokila was deliberately provoking him either. The so-called magic theory simply consisted of formulas and theorems that were applicable to the entire magic system. Through the magic theory had been summarized by the predecessors, the mages could have a deeper understanding of magic. If the problems that Zokila wanted to discuss were something that he had yet to master, it would be a good learning opportunity for him. After hearing Zokila's words, Sendros glanced at him with a hint of displeasure on his face. He was obviously clear about Zokila's intentions. However, before Lin Li arrived at the Darkness Shrine, he had already discussed the matter with the Darkness Council several times. Actually, Sendros and the 5 high priests did not have any differing opinions about what to do about Lin Li, because they all recognized the value of Lin Li and the Tower of Dusk, and felt that they were crucial to the Darkness Shrine. However, the 5 high priests felt that they ought to be more careful and conscientious when dealing with the crisis this time. "Forget it, instead of trying to stop them by using my authority, it would be better to let them see for themselves just how incredibly competent this young chap is." At the thought of this, Sendros decided not to intervene, and instead remained seated to watch the show, calmly. Seeing that Sendros didn't say anything to stop them, Zokila felt a little relieved, and he turned to look at Lin Li. Still behaving very politely, he said, "I'd like to ask you about Egno's magical damage chain formula. Although I have studied that for several years, I have only deduced the chain process to 67 steps using the formula. I seem to have hit a plateau, and never got to achieve a breakthrough again. I wonder if you have any explanation or solutions for this." Master Felik. Egno was allegedly the first dean of the High Elf's Royal Academy of Magic during the Dark Age, and was the most noble magic theorist of the Dark Age. The hierarchical system of mages that was commonly used today was formulated by Egno. There were a total of 25 levels from a mage apprentice to the sanctuary realm. Hence, there was a clear path for mages. Apart from creating the hierarchical system, Egno had also contributed greatly to the magic theory. The magical damage chain formula was one of his contributions. The so-called magical damage chain formula meant that when a target was hit by an offensive spell, there would be additional damage done if a second spell was cast at the right time. In theory, the effect could be repeated and perpetuated. In the end, the damage could even be increased to a daunting level. According to that, Egno created the magical damage chain formula to put this theory into practice to the greatest extent possible. It was said that Egno managed to create a record of 213 chain magic damage combo done to the target using his own magical formula during the Dark Age. Using a combo of attacks below level 15, he even managed to make the damage nearly as powerful as that of sanctuary level attacks. After the Dark Age ended, even Juresco, failed to break that record, and the best he could achieve was 171 chain combo. However, that was the highest record so far in the history of magic. However, in Lin Li's opinion, there was too much emphasis on the quantity of chain damage attacks, so much that it had even somewhat ignored the significance of magic in actual combat. In actual combat, the increased damage would indeed allow one to win, but blindly pursuing the quantity of attacks would result in major losses. The continuous casting of more than 200 magic spells in a row would require a massive amount of time and mana that ordinary people could not afford. Even for those who could afford it, they could rather simply cast a sanctuary-level magic instead of torturing themselves. The real benefit of that theory was that it would allow the mage to familiarize themselves with the characteristics of various kinds of magic and master the effects they would have on each other. It was just a target that would serve as a motivation for the mages. In order to create a magical combo chain, one would have to do more than just cast the same magic spell continuously. Although Lin Li could cast the 1,000 miles of ice twice within a short period of time, it definitely couldn't be considered a magical chain. Egno's magical damage chain formula was also mentioned in Juresco's Book of Eternity, together with his record of 171 times. However, Lin Li knew that Juresco's limit was far beyond 171 times. Perhaps he would be able to achieve 10 or 100 times that. Juresco's explanation was very simple, but it was too boring. Lin Li felt that it was completely meaningless. Hence, after hearing that Zokila wanted to discuss the chain formula, Lin Li frowned slightly, and was somewhat disappointed deep down. He was keen on learning something from the discussion, but there was honestly nothing to learn about that formula. Given Lin Li's current strength, it wouldn't be hard for him to use the endless chain formula. However, there was no need for him to do it. However, the necromancer Zokila thought that he had found Lin Li's weakness when he saw him frowning. Although he didn't feel any real joy, he still couldn't help but secretly rejoice about how wise he was. He was not out to make Lin Li feel awkward or embarrassed. However, the matter was just very important, and had to be taken seriously. If Lin Li wasn't competent enough, how could he feel safe about leaving the Darkness Shrine's destiny in his hands? After Zokila said those words, silence filled the air in the hall, and the 5 high priests focused all their attention on Lin Li. Egno's magical damage chain formula had been extremely famous during the Dark Age, but it was almost unknown now. In fact, everyone knew that in actual combat, no one could cast a combo of more than 200 magical spells. However, the formula could show a person's mastery of the magic theory to a certain extent, and it could also show one's strength. The strength of a person was not only determined by his level, because people of the same level were also divided by their strength. The mastery of magic, the judgment of timing, and the grasp of battle opportunities were all considered important factors that contributed to the strength of a person. For example, there were some mages who spent their entire lives immersed in magic books, and were full of knowledge. However, the lack of actual combat experience made it difficult for them to contend with the mages of the same level who had been through hundreds of battles. Meanwhile, some mages might have rich combat experience which allowed them to cope with battles, but their shortcoming of being unfamiliar with magic theory would show whenever they encountered a situation where their experience couldn't be applied. After listening to Lin Li's adventures taking place over the past 2 years, the 5 high priests were rather certain of Lin Li's actual combat experience. However, no one was perfect. As a young mage, he had limited time to study and research magic. Besides, he even allocated some time for forging. Hence, how could he have more time to consolidate his magic foundation? Lin Li didn't know what the 5 high priests were thinking. Although he found the topic to be extremely boring, he couldn't choose not to answer it just because of that. He sorted out his thoughts and eased the frown on his forehead. I can't deny that the added damage caused by the magical chain is indeed an important mean for mages during battles. However, I think 4 or 6 would be the best amount for this magical chain. Aiming to achieve the highest number of spells launched using the chain formula would be rather inappropriate. Of course, when learning magic, the formula would help a mage understand and master his own battle tactics. Lin Li was telling the truth, but the high priests were in doubt of his words, especially when they heard Lin Li say that the best number of magical chain spells was 4 to 6, they now felt even more worried about Lin Li's strength. In fact, they were also feeling flustered. If it weren't because they were worried about the Darkness Shrine's destiny, they would think that Lin Li was right. However, they just wanted to deduce Lin Li's abilities as soon as possible now. However, out of respect for Sendros, the 5 high priests did not show any contempt and disdain for Lin Li, despite being convinced that Lin Li wasn't reliable. Zokila sighed secretly, and got ready to say something to give them an out. However, just when the 5 high priests thought that Lin Li was stumped, Lin Li said something again. Speaking of the number of chain magic spells in a combo, if only the formula is used without consideration of the status of the caster, I'd say the answer's an infinite chain. I hope you'll give me some guidance, High Priest Zokila, Lin Li said humbly. In fact, Master Felik, achieving so much at your current age is already. Zokila suddenly snapped back to reality when he was halfway through his words, and looked at Lin Li in shock and disbelief. Wait, did you mention an infinite chain? What a joke. Achieving the effects of the magical chain was not possible just by creating a magical storm, because that would just be magical damage. Otherwise, there would be no formula. In order to achieve the effect of increased damage by magical chain, the characteristics of each kind of magic, the inert duration of magical elements, and the duration of attack were all factors that had to be considered. If compared to potions and alchemy, magical chains were like potions made with herbs, with different properties. One could only formulate the perfect potion after mastering all the properties of each herb and knowing how they would affect each other. Even Sendros, who was already sure that Lin Li would be able to surprise everyone, couldn't help but be astonished when he heard Lin Li mention the infinite chain. Of course, Sendros also knew that magical chains were unlikely to be used during actual combat. However, that at least meant that Lin Li had already reached an incredible level in mastering that kind of magic. Yes, infinite chain, but only in theory, of course. After all, the mana and mental strength of humans are limited, and even if there were hundreds or thousands of spells in the chain, they would still eventually run out, Lin Li said calmly, as if he weren't talking about anything incredible. In fact, he really wasn't. With the Book of Eternity, the enlightenment he had gained in the seven-realm spiral of the Sky Castle, and the knowledge he gained from Balak's magical crystal, his knowledge was far beyond what an ordinary level 23 legendary mage should have. In fact, in terms of knowledge, Lin Li was probably not inferior to an actual sanctuary-level mage. After hearing Lin Li's definite answer, everyone in the room was still in disbelief. However, Zokila had really worked hard on the theory of the magical chain, so when he heard Lin Li emphasize it being a theoretical concept, he looked forward to hearing more, and was less doubtful. Actually, it is not that difficult to establish the formula of the infinite chain. The key is to find the right trick. The formula of the infinite chain that I built begins from the level 10 Hammer of Flames. There's nothing much to say about this spell, and I'm sure everyone knows that I chose it because its duration is very short, but it has a certain activation effect on the fire magical elements. Next, it would be Fireball, Wind Slash, and Flaming Storm. After Flaming Storm, I chose 1,000 Miles of Ice, Lin Li said quickly. He explained rather clearly the characteristics of various magic spells and the way they would influence each other. Upon hearing Lin Li's words, Zokila couldn't help but nod profusely. However, when he heard Lin Li mention the 1,000 Miles of Ice, all of a sudden, he felt puzzled and astonished. Everyone knew that the fire magic and ice magic would indeed cause some additional damage to the target. However, the magical chain was different. It was meant for a continuous increase in damage done by the fire element, in this case. Wouldn't the addition of ice element magic cause all of the previous efforts to go in vain? At the thought of this, Zokila quickly interrupted Lin Li as he asked in bewilderment, Master Felix, it seems to be inappropriate to add 1,000 Miles of Ice. To put it bluntly, he was saving Lin Li some face by using such phrasing. After all, Lin Li was a distinguished guest of Sendros. If it had been someone else, he would have definitely cussed at him. Apart from Zokila, everyone else was also staring at Lin Li with doubtful gazes. Although not all of them were experts in magical chains like Zokila, they were still rather clear about the basic rules of the famous magic theory. However, Lin Li seemed to have already expected Zokila to doubt him. He simply smiled a little, and calmly said, this is the trick that I've mentioned. After going through 20 chains, the fire magical element would be accumulated to a huge degree, but its activity would decrease with repeated activations. So, I chose to use 1,000 Miles of Ice and not another individual attack. The purpose of spell is to increase the activity of fire magical element. Although the fire damage would be slightly reduced by using this magic, it would provide convenience for the subsequent chains. As the magical chain progressed, there would be reduced activity in the selected magical element. When dealing with that issue, Zokila would choose to increase the level of the magical chain, just like many other mages who studied the magical chains. However, Lin Li unexpectedly chose to sacrifice part of the magic damage in exchange for elemental activity. Zokila thought about it for a while, and felt that it seemed to be true to a certain extent, for Lin Li's method also eradicated the issue of continuous increase in level of magic. Next, would be a repetition of what I mentioned earlier. However, the bearing point will have to be replaced by snowstorm after 2 cycles. Next, repeat the cycle again. Actually, as long as the critical points of the inertness of the magical elements are deduced, it will be simple to build the formula, Lin Li said casually. Although he told everyone that it was theoretical, he would be able to create a magical chain rather easily. However, there would basically be no chance to do so in actual combat. Like what he mentioned before, 4 to 6 times would be the best, otherwise, one would be looking for trouble. In that case, Master Felix, I'd like to ask where the problem lies in this magical chain formula that I've established. Although Zokila had already deduced the chain formula established by Lin Li, he also knew that Lin Li had the Book of Eternity. He thought that perhaps there would be some answers and information about the magical chain that Juresco used back then, and Lin Li had merely just memorized the concepts. However, Lin Li's subsequent answers soon made Zokila convinced. With just a few simple modifications, the entire magical chain formula would immediately become more fluid and smooth, while theoretically achieving the effect of the infinite chain. Indeed, as Lin Li mentioned, the key was to master a trick in order to solve all problems. However, discovering that trick was definitely not a coincidence. It required a thorough understanding of magic, coupled with precise calculations, in order to make it the key to solving problems. Otherwise, it would only result in more trouble. Zokila stood up and bowed to Lin Li before keeping mum again. Even though that was not enough to prove that Lin Li had the ability to resolve the crisis that struck the Darkness Shrine, Zokila believed that Lin Li at least had sufficient knowledge in terms of magic theory, and that there was nothing else he could test him on. It was a mind game that was also a good test for deducing a mage's understanding and mastery of magic. Although Zokila had nothing else to say, the other 4 high priests were still worried. In fact, Zokila was not entirely reassured either, but he simply couldn't think of what he could do to test the young mage Lin Li further. Well, he couldn't possibly challenge him to a fight. Lin Li was rather bewildered as well, and thought, didn't he say that he'd like to discuss a question with me? Why did he stop after mentioning a game like Magical Chain? Lin Li didn't think that his knowledge was all-encompassing. In the Book of Eternity, Juresco said, knowledge is the most devout belief a mage can have. There were no limits to the amount of knowledge one could have. Hence, Lin Li had always been passionate about learning opportunities. Previously in the Brilliant Shrine, Lin Li was fortunate to have received the personal guidance of Pope Rosario, and thus learned a lot about power of light and holy light magic. Hence, Lin Li came to the Darkness Shrine with the intention to learn in addition to accepting Sendra's invitation. He hoped that the learning opportunity would allow him to gain a better understanding of the nomological power of darkness. Just when the atmosphere in the hall made everyone feel a little awkward, the Lich Durgula, who was wearing a golden crown on his head, shook his head a little, and said in a peculiar tone, Master Felix, the things you've mentioned just now are indeed really inspiring. I also have a question for you. I wonder if it's convenient for you to answer me. Oh. I'd be happy to discuss with you, please tell me what it's about. Upon hearing Durgula's words, Lin Li was instantly rejuvenated as his peculiar voice was rather ear-piercing. He knew that Rosario was willing to give him some pointers, because he had gotten rid of the Viper's poison for Rosario. Although Lin Li was acquainted with the Darkness Shrine, there was no way they would tell him everything unless they owed him a huge favor. Hence, discussing problems was a rare learning opportunity for him. The Lich Durgula stretched his slender branch-like fingers out and touched the golden crown on his head. He then slightly complacently said, we all know that the levels of magic are divided according to the difficulty of casting spells. Each level corresponds to the mage's level as well. However, there are some magic spells that greatly surpass others of the same level in terms of mana consumption. Another word for those magic spells that Durgula had mentioned was Forbidden Curse, and most of them were advanced spells. After some simplification, the difficulty of casting would be reduced, and the mage who initially had yet to reach a higher level would then have the ability to cast such advanced magic. However, in order to maintain the power of the magic and to make up for the reduction in difficulty of casting, the simplified magic would require more mana than the original version. One reason any of them was called Forbidden Curse was because its power was far beyond the level it belonged to. Another reason was that it couldn't be used easily by mages, and if the necessary standards were not achieved, the huge mana depletion would cause harm to the caster. The mana depletion by this type of magic is too excessive. Although it is powerful, it will also put a heavy burden on the caster. Mage Felix, do you have any special opinions about this? Georgula continued. His question was a better method for testing a mage's abilities compared to Zokila's question. It was not only a test of the mage's mastery of magic, but also involved the mage's ability to modify and improvise advanced magic. Mana was the crux of a mage's survival on the battlefield, and the mana of every mage was limited. Under limitations, using less mana to cast more powerful magic was undoubtedly a huge improvement to a mage's strength. Since Georgula wanted to further test Lin Li's abilities by asking that question, it would be impossible for him to be clueless on it. In fact, out of the 5 high priests, Georgula was the best at modifying the use of forbidden spells. He would call his modified forbidden spells, which saved more mana, minor forbidden spells. Master Felix, this may be a bit generic, and can't be explained clearly in a short time. Let me give an example to facilitate our discussion about this issue. Let's take the level 23 forbidden spell, Thunderstorm Disaster, as an example. I'm sure you know of this spell and its power. However, the consumption of mana is too overbearing for a level 23 mage. Since Georgula wanted to test Lin Li, he definitely wouldn't talk about a low-level magic, because that would defeat the purpose of the test. After all, Lin Li was a level 23 legendary mage, and many of the so-called forbidden spells had no effect on him at all. In terms of the difficulty of spell casting, the Thunderstorm Disaster belonged to level 23, but the consumption of mana was close to the peak of level 24 magic. If no modifications were made, a large amount of mana would definitely be depleted instantly during casting. The Thunderstorm Disaster was close to its ultimate form in the legendary realm, and was genuine domain magic. Using this magic, it would be easy to destroy a city in an instant. Thunderstorm Disaster had already been modified and reduced. Apart from being extremely talented and having a strong foundation in magic, understanding and mastering magic would be essential for making further modifications to reduce the mana consumption. Georgula was not deliberately trying to put Lin Li on the spot. After all, they knew the value of Lin Li and the Tower of Dusk. Even the Brilliant Shrine was trying hard to get close to Lin Li and the Tower of Dusk. How could the Darkness Shrine sit back and do nothing? However, Georgula and the other high priests knew that Sendros hadn't invited Lin Li simply for the sake of forging close ties. Instead, he wanted to entrust the fate of the Darkness Shrine to Lin Li in hopes of letting him help them survive the crisis. That definitely made Georgula and the rest worried, for pinning their hopes on a young mage would mean sending the Darkness Shrine directly into desperate straits. Georgula did not expect to find out if Lin Li was trustworthy or competent enough just through those tests. Unless Lin Li showed Sanctuary Realm power, it would be impossible for him to help. Hence, he hoped for Sendros to give up after seeing Lin Li's performance in the tests. The other high priests shared the same thoughts, especially after hearing that he had used the Thunderstorm Disaster as an example. They were sure that Lin Li wouldn't pass the test. Every magic spell used by mages had been perfected through several modifications made after numerous trial and error processes. Making fundamental modifications would be even more difficult than creating a new spell. After Georgula finished speaking, he looked at Lin Li, waiting for the ingenious young mage to answer. He didn't notice the awkwardness on Sendros' face at all. The other 4 high priests did notice Sendros' expression, but they all thought that Sendros was upset with them for making things difficult for the guest he'd invited. However, they could only feel apologetic in secret because the matter concerned the life and death of the Darkness Shrine. They decided to apologize to Sendros after everything was over. In fact, at this moment, the 5 high priests had become more and more certain that their approach was correct. It was because they clearly saw some confusion on Lin Li's face. When they were discussing the magical chain, Lin Li appeared rather calm. Hence, the confusion on his face now made obvious that there was an issue. Finally, Lin Li touched his nose embarrassedly while the 5 high priests looked at him with anticipation. Sorry, excessive consumption of mana? I've never encountered that issue before. Does the thunderstorm disaster really take up a lot of mana? Lin Li's answer immediately made the 5 high priests feel rather stunned. What kind of answer is this? Can he do it or not? The 5 high priests would never believe that Lin Li didn't understand the thunderstorm disaster. After all, he was a level 23 legendary mage as well. How could he not understand a spell that was of the same level as him? What did he mean by never encountering the issue? Could it be that he had never used this forbidden spell before? Everyone looked at Sendros blankly, but he was extremely awkward and embarrassed at the moment. He didn't explain anything to the 5 high priests, and simply turned to Lin Li and said, Master Felix, since you've come all the way from afar, why don't we pause the conversation while I get someone to arrange a place for you to rest in? Lin Li also felt that the atmosphere was a little strange, and he reckoned that he might not be able to find out anything today. Hence, he nodded, and said, I'll have to trouble you, then, Master Sendros. Lin Li then left the hall under the lead of a priest whom Sendros summoned, going to the room that was prepared for him. When Lin Li left, the 5 high priests stood up one after another and walked towards Sendros. Lin Li's answer was way too shocking to them, and the 5 high priests had yet to understand what that young mage Lin Li meant. As the person who asked the question, Jurgula adjusted the crown on his head, and asked Sendros in a hoarse voice, Sir, we know that we were being too disrespectful to Master Felix just now, but we're all doing it for the Darkness Shrine. Besides, we can't stop worrying, since Master Felix refused to answer our questions just now. How can we entrust the future of the Darkness Shrine to him? Sendros was a little annoyed, but he also knew that they didn't do it out of selfishness, and had the interests of the Darkness Shrine at heart. Hence, he suppressed his displeasure, and said, Silly, didn't Master Felix already answer your question? Don't you understand? However, Sendros' words made Jurgula and the rest even more confused. Was that even considered an answer? If it is, it's just an incompetent answer, and Lin Li's admitting that he can't do much about the issue. However, it seems unusual now that Sendros is behaving this way, Jurgula thought. Seeing that the several high priests were puzzled, Sendros began to feel infuriated again. He stood up and looked at the crowd in displeasure before hollering, What are you guys thinking? Haven't I told you before that he possesses infinite mana? Well, the other high priests wanted to say that that was impossible, but when they saw Sendros' expression, they dared not say anything more. Besides, they were extremely convinced by Sendros, whom they trusted greatly. Although they found it unbelievable, they didn't think that Sendros would deceive them. It was no wonder that Master Felix said that he had never encountered this problem before. Since he possesses almost infinite mana, what is the thunderstorm disaster to him? I'm afraid the infinite chain that he mentioned is not just theoretical. Since he has infinite mana, he would probably be able to break Egno's record easily. The 5 high priests looked at each other immediately while recalling the tests that they had put him through just now, feeling like they were clowns. In particular, Jurgula, who had a skeleton-like face, even began to blush. Of course he'd be embarrassed and ashamed for asking a silly question. However, although the 5 high priests felt a little ashamed about everything that had happened previously, they did not think they had done anything wrong. Besides, they still did not trust in Lin Li's abilities as much as Sendros did. Actually, it wasn't their fault either, for anyone in their shoes wouldn't pin all their hopes on a person they did not know well. In fact, Sendros also understood the intentions and thoughts of the 5 high priests. After all, everyone had the best interests of the Darkness Shrine at heart, and if it weren't for the fact that he was the chief and knew more than the others did, he probably wouldn't believe it easily either. However, he still had to warn them even though he understood their plight. With a sullen expression, he said to the 5 of them, Master Felix is our honored guest. When you go back, tell your men to behave themselves. If I find out that any of you had the nerve to disrespect Master Felix, I won't spare any mercy, even if it's your biological son. Yes. The 5 high priests could not help but shiver as they quickly bowed at Sendros. Although they were all members of the Darkness Council, it was still helmed by Sendros, the chief high priest. In the Darkness Shrine, Sendros was equivalent to Pope Rosario of the Brilliant Shrine as far as status was concerned. None of the believers of darkness would dare to disobey him at all. Lin Li was ushered into a room by a priest, but he didn't actually need much rest. Although he flew directly from the Brilliant Shrine, he didn't feel any fatigue, because he was a level 23 legendary mage. Besides, he had a massive amount of mana and mental strength. However, he found it to be a shame that he didn't get to find out what the urgent matter of Sendros was. Hence, he had no idea if it was really important or not. Besides, he didn't learn anything from the discussion with the two priests at all. After sending away the priest, Lin Li took out the Book of Eternity, and began reading it instead of thinking about something else. He was fully engrossed in the book too. It had been about 2 years since he got the Book of Eternity, but the more he read, the more knowledge he acquired. However, he also felt that he was much further away from mastering all the knowledge in the book. Juresco's masterpiece was definitely something that other magic books couldn't compare to. Whenever Lin Li truly understood a sentence, he could clearly feel his progress. The next 2 days were rather peaceful. Sendros still did not mention why he got Lin Li to go to the Darkness Shrine, but Lin Li could not be bothered to ask about it. No one would ask for more trouble, after all. Apart from learning magic and reading the Book of Eternity, Lin Li would follow a priest on a tour around the Darkness Shrine. Everyone in the Darkness Shrine would behave very respectfully whenever they saw Lin Li, be it an ordinary believer or a priest. In fact, even without Sendros' special warning, the believers of the Darkness Shrine, who heard that Lin Li was an honored guest, knew not to be rude to Lin Li. Back in the Brilliant Shrine, Siddharth, too, wouldn't have dared to point a finger at Lin Li if Rosario hadn't had to keep his poisoning a secret. Although there was almost no obvious alternation between day and night in the Darkness Shrine, Lin Li could guess that it was early morning by judging time according to his own habits. When he heard a knock on the door from outside, Lin Li put away the dragon crystal of the Dragon of Destruction and got up to open the door. There were 2 people standing outside the door, one of whom was a servant who specifically listened to Lin Li's orders, while the other was a priest who had shown Lin Li around the Darkness Shrine in the past 2 days. Although the Darkness Shrine was not small, Lin Li had visited almost all of the attractions in the Darkness Shrine, and there was nothing much left for him to see. Besides, what Lin Li really wanted to see was the Darkness classics of the Darkness Shrine. However, he felt that it would be inappropriate to raise that request with Sendros. After all, he'd managed to read the Light Bible only because he had gotten rid of the Viper's poison in Pope Rosario's body. Besides, he wasn't that close to Sendros. However, there seemed to be a hint of excitement in Belisi's expression today. After seeing Lin Li open the door, he first saluted him before saying, "Master Felik, today is the day of the Darkness sacrifice. The night werewolves and the vampires will be fighting each other in the arena as part of the ritual, and the High Priest would like me to invite you to the event. Would you be interested?" The night werewolves and the vampires were the races with the strongest faith in the Darkness Shrine. Legend had it that they were enemies by nature, and once they fought, they would spare no mercy. However, in fact, the battle between the 2 groups was more of a ritual to worship the god of darkness. Nonetheless, it wasn't a performance, but a genuine sacrifice of blood and lives. Lin Li could actually imagine that the battle would definitely be low-level, regardless of how intense the battle might be. To Lin Li, the battle was just like child's play. However, Lin Li gave it some thought again, and felt that he might as well watch the battle since he had nothing to do. "Okay, alright then, I'll go take a look." Lin Li followed Belisi to an arena in the Darkness Shrine, and could hear the cheers from afar. The 5 high priests were all present at the grandstand in front of the arena, and Lin Li greeted them one by one before taking a seat at the allocated location. However, Lin Li felt rather strange about something. A sacrificial ritual like this was actually like the prayers performed by the believers of light. Lin Li reckoned that it should be a very common thing in the Darkness Shrine. Wasn't it a little ridiculous and senseless for all 5 of them to appear here? On the arena, a young night werewolf was fighting a vampire, and just like Lin Li expected, both of them had only reached level 15. Although the fight was rather intense, it was boring to Lin Li. The common characteristic the werewolves and the vampires shared was that they had extremely strong recovery abilities. Unless their limbs were broken or their innards were ruptured, the injuries that would generally make others lose their mobility would be nothing to them. That resulted in the extension of the duration of their battles. After watching 4 battles in a row, Lin Li wanted to yawn. It was not that he looked down on them or anything, the problem lay with the fact that he had been trying to improve his strength, and while he could gain some combat experience from watching a battle between masters, there was nothing for him to gain from a fight that seemed to be one between children. Master Felix, I was really envious after hearing about the adventures you had previously. Unfortunately, I can't leave this place easily because of my duties. I usually spar with them, but we've all been spending time with each other for so many years, and so we already know one another inside out. When we spar, it's almost always the same as the battle there, said the lich Georgula, who was getting rather emotional. Staring at the battle in the arena, he shook his head slightly. Don't complain to me about it anymore, High Priest Georgula. You at least have a few companions of the same level as you to spar with. I don't get such opportunities in the Tower of Dusk, Lin Li answered smilingly. He didn't think much of the fact that Georgula had suddenly brought up that topic. However, Georgula seemed to have suddenly thought of something as he turned to look at Lin Li with a slight gleam of excitement in his eyes. He said, Master Felix, I do have a request that may seem rude, but don't hold it against me. I wonder if I may have the honor to consult you about actual combat experience? Oh? Lin Li glanced at Georgula, but unfortunately he couldn't see much in his expression. However, Georgula's tone wasn't aggressive at all, and he seemed to only want to discuss their experiences. Although Lin Li headed to the Darkness Shrine because he had been invited by Sendros, he also intended to learn and find out more about dark magic. Meanwhile, Georgula happened to be a lich who practiced dark magic. Even Sendros praised him for his accomplishments in dark magic when he mentioned him. Hence, Lin Li didn't turn down the idea, because he felt that it would be wonderful to have a legendary powerhouse as an opponent. Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.